This is the entire story of Belle Gunness, the serial killer who murdered approximately 30 people, most men she lured through personal advertisements on her Indiana farm between 1902 and 1908, and whom she killed for their money and insurance payouts, using poisoning and axe murders before dismembering and burying the bodies in her hog lot and farm grounds. On November 11, 1859, in the small village of Selbu in Norway, a baby girl was born to Paul and Berit Storseth, who were poor tenant farmers. The girl was named Brynhild Paulsdatter Storseth. She would grow up to become one of the most twisted and cunning serial killers that America has ever seen. She would be called Hell's Belle. She would be known as the Lady Bluebeard. She would be known as the Indiana Ogress. She would be called the Mistress of the Castle of Death. But first, let me tell you about a young woman who wanted nothing more than to escape her poor life in Norway and find wealth and success in America. Brynhild was the youngest of 8 children born to the Storseth family. She grew up in a very poor household. The family had little money and worked hard just to survive. Young Brynhild was often picked on by her siblings and the other children in her village. She was not a pretty girl, and she was not popular. The people who knew her as a child said different things about her. Some people said she was a well-behaved child and did as she was told. Other people who knew her said she was a terrible child. They said she was mean and nasty. They said she was always playing dirty tricks on people. They said she was a liar who did not talk much to anyone. Life in her Norwegian village was hard and poor. Brynhild had very little hope for a good future. At 14 years old, she started working on neighboring farms. She did work like milking cows and herding cattle. She saved up every bit of money she could from this work. She worked for many years with one goal in mind: to save enough money to leave Norway and go to America, where she believed she could find a better life. The story of her childhood and young adulthood was marked by one very dark moment that many historians believe changed her forever. When Brynhild was a young woman of about 17 or 18 years old, she attended a country dance.
She was pregnant with a child at that time.
During the dance, a young man from a wealthy family attacked her. He kicked her hard in the stomach. This man was angry with her for reasons that were never fully clear. When he kicked her, the result was tragic. She miscarved the baby she was carrying. The baby died inside her. The trauma of losing her baby was severe and painful. The wealthy young man was never punished or brought to justice. It was said that his family had enough money and power to protect him from the law. People who had known Brynhild before this terrible event said that something changed inside her that day. Her personality seemed to shift. She became harder. She became more cold. She became more focused on money and success. She became more willing to do whatever it took to get what she wanted. Some people said her dreams of having a family turned into something darker. Some people said she developed a hatred for men. Whether any of this was true or not, what we know for certain is that after that event, Brynhild Storseth became someone different. By the time she turned 21 years old, she had saved enough money to leave her homeland. In 1881, she left Norway and sailed to America. She went through immigration at Castle Garden in New York. When she arrived, she changed her name. She decided to call herself Bella Peterson. Later, she would use the name Belle instead of Bella. She was trying to start a completely new life in a new country. She headed to Chicago, where her older sister Nellie had already immigrated and settled down with her husband. When Belle first arrived in Chicago, she worked as a domestic servant in homes. She cleaned houses and cooked meals for wealthy families. It was hard work for low pay. Then she found work at a butcher shop in Chicago. She worked there cutting up animal carcasses. She became very skilled at this work. She learned how to use knives and cleavers to cut meat into pieces. She learned how to butcher animals. Years later, this skill would become very important to her dark activities. She would use the knowledge she learned in the butcher shop to cut up human bodies. While working in Chicago, Belle met a man named Mads Albert Sorensen. Mads was a fellow Norwegian immigrant. He had come to America looking for a better life, just like Belle had. The two immigrants found comfort in each other. They had the same heritage. They spoke the same language. They understood each other's dreams and hopes. Mads Sorensen worked as a night watchman at a department store. He had a steady job that paid decent money. In 1884, Belle and Mads decided to get married. They were both in their 20s, and they thought that marriage would help them build the life they wanted together. After they married, Mads and Belle started having children together. According to records, they had 4 children. The first child was a girl named Caroline. The second child was a boy named Axel. The third child was a girl named Myrtle. The fourth child was a girl named Lucy. But their family was not just their biological children. They also took in a foster child, a little girl named Jenny Olsen. Jenny had lost her mother, and her father could not care for her properly. The Sorensens took Jenny into their home and raised her as part of the family. For a while, it seemed like Mads and Belle were going to have a normal, respectable life. Mads was working steadily. Belle was managing the household. The children were growing up, but Belle was never satisfied with what she had. She wanted more. She wanted wealth. She wanted luxury. She wanted nice things. Her sister Nellie often complained that Belle was not grateful for what she had. Her sister said that Belle was always focused on what she did not have rather than appreciating what she did have. Nellie said that Belle's desire for more money and more luxury was becoming an obsession. In 1893 or 1894, Mads and Belle decided to start a business together. They bought a small candy store and confectionery shop in Chicago. The shop was located at the corner of Grand Avenue and Elizabeth Street. They hoped to make money running the shop. They put their savings into the business. They worked long hours to try to make it successful, but it seemed like the business did not make enough money. The shop was not doing well. They were losing money instead of making money. Then something very strange happened. The candy store caught on fire. The building burned to the ground. Fire investigators looked at the damage, but they could not prove that the fire was set on purpose. It might have been an accident. It might have been the fault of a kerosene lamp that exploded, or it might have been something else. Nobody was ever charged with starting the fire. But Belle had a big surprise. She had insured the candy shop. When the shop burned down, Belle got the insurance money. She and Mads used that insurance money to buy a new home. Then that home burned down too. Once again, the fire was ruled to be an accident. Once again, Belle had insured the home. Once again, Belle received the insurance money. Now Belle was beginning to understand something very important. She was learning that she could make money from fires and from deaths if people had life insurance policies. She was learning that she could collect money if things caught on fire and if people died. This realization would become very important to everything that happened next. Around this same time, 2 of Belle and Mads' children started to get sick. First, their daughter Caroline became ill. She developed something that doctors called acute colitis, which is an inflammation of the colon. She suffered terribly, and then she died. Belle was very sad about losing her daughter, or at least she appeared to be sad. But Belle had a life insurance policy on Caroline's life. When Caroline died, Belle collected the insurance money. Then their son Axel also became ill with the same disease, acute colitis. He suffered just like his sister had suffered. And then he also died. Once again, Belle had an insurance policy on his life. And once again, she collected the insurance money. People started to whisper. They started to wonder if the children had really died from disease or if something else had happened to them. Some people suspected that the children had been poisoned. Colitis and poisoning by strychnine can show very similar symptoms, but nothing was ever proven. Nobody was ever charged. The death of the children was simply recorded as natural causes. Belle collected her insurance money, and nobody could do anything about it. Then came July 30th, 1900. On this day, something happened that seemed like a coincidence but was probably not a coincidence at all. Mads Sorensen came home complaining that he was ill. He said he did not feel well. He said his body hurt. As he lay in bed feeling sick, he started to have convulsions. His body shook violently. He could not control his muscles. His face twisted in pain. The convulsions got worse and worse. Then Mads Sorensen died. The family doctor who had been treating Mads said that he died of heart failure. But another doctor who looked at Mads after he died said that he thought Mads had been poisoned with strychnine. Strychnine is a poison that causes severe muscle convulsions and terrible pain before death. It was a poison that was available and could be put into food or drink without being easily detected. The first doctor disagreed with the second doctor about the cause of death. The first doctor's opinion was the one that was accepted. Mads Sorensen was said to have died of natural causes. But here is something very strange about the timing of Mads' death. Mads had 2 different life insurance policies with 2 different insurance companies. These policies had been written at different times with different dates. When the first policy was started, It had one date for when it would start paying out. When the second policy was taken out later, it had a different date. It was extremely rare for both policies to be active on the same day. Both policies would pay out only if Mads died during a very specific window of time when both policies were in effect at the same time. By an extraordinary coincidence, Mads Sorensen died on the only single day when both of his life insurance policies overlapped and both would pay out. What were the odds? Belle received about $8,500 from Mads' life insurance policies. This was a huge amount of money at that time. When Mads' family learned that he had died, they became suspicious. They wondered if Belle had something to do with his death. They knew about the fires. They knew about the children dying. They knew about the insurance money. Mads' brother and other family members demanded that an investigation be opened into his death. They insisted that the authorities look into the circumstances. They said that Mads did not have any history of heart disease. They said he had seemed healthy just days before. They said it did not make sense that he would suddenly have a heart attack and die. But by this time, Belle had moved away from Chicago. With the $8,500 she had received from Mads' life insurance, she bought a farm in Porte County, Indiana. Porte was a small town in northern Indiana. It was not near Chicago. It was remote and rural. The farm was located on a road called McClung Road. Belle moved to this farm with her 2 surviving children from her marriage to Mads. She also brought Jenny Olsen, her adopted daughter, with her. She was moving away from Chicago and the suspicious people who were asking too many questions about the deaths and the fires. She was starting fresh again. She was going to start her new life on this isolated farm in Indiana. On the farm in Porte, Belle worked hard to establish herself as a respectable woman in the community. She was working as a farmer. She took care of animals. She maintained the property. She bought a hog pen and raised pigs. She became known as a decent woman who was working hard to make a good living for herself and her children. The people in Porte did not know about her past. They did not know about the fires in Chicago. They did not know about her first husband's suspicious death. They did not know about the children who had died from acute colitis. They only knew the Belle Gunness that she presented to them now. She seemed like a strong, hard-working woman who was struggling to survive and support her family. But Belle was not going to stay alone for long. In 1902, she met a man named Belle Gunness. Peter was also a Norwegian immigrant. He had a job as a hog farmer, and he also worked as a butcher. He had some money saved up. He owned property. Belle saw in Peter someone who could help her with her farm, and she saw someone with money. Peter was a widower. He had been married before, and his first wife had died. He had a young daughter from his first marriage. Belle and Belle Gunness decided to get married. On April 1st, 1902, they were married. Peter moved into Belle's house on the farm with his young daughter. Belle seemed happy. She seemed like a devoted wife. She seemed kind to Peter's daughter. Everything appeared to be going well for the new couple. But then, just 8 months after they were married, something terrible happened. Peter was in the kitchen of their home. He was working. Suddenly, Peter was found on the kitchen floor. His head was bleeding badly. There was a wound at the back of his head. His body was covered in blood. He was severely injured. Belle told a story about what had happened. She said that Peter had been standing on a shelf or a ladder in the kitchen. She said that he had a meat grinder with him. The meat grinder was a tool used for grinding meat. As Peter stood on the shelf, the meat grinder had fallen off the shelf. It had fallen down onto Peter's head. It had struck him very hard on the head. Peter had fallen to the ground. After he fell, Belle said, Peter somehow had also managed to get scalded by hot water. She said that hot water had fallen on him as well. It was a terrible accident, Belle said. It was a tragedy. Belle Gunness died from these injuries. His death was investigated by the authorities. There was an inquest held into the circumstances of his death. But the investigation found that Belle was telling the truth. The death was ruled to be an accident. Nobody was charged with anything. The death of Belle Gunness was officially recorded as accidental death. But once again, people in the town started to whisper. They wondered about the strange death. They wondered how a meat grinder could fall from a shelf and hit someone just right. They wondered why there was so much blood. They wondered how Peter could have gotten scalded by hot water at the same time. But the authorities had made their determination. Peter's death was an accident. There was nothing more to investigate. And of course, Belle had insured Peter's life as well. When Peter died, Belle received life insurance money. Now Belle was a widow twice over. She had collected insurance money from the deaths of her 2 husbands, from the deaths of 2 of her children, and from the destruction of her businesses and homes. She was becoming quite wealthy from these deaths and disasters. But she wanted more. She was always wanting more. After Peter's death, there was one other death in the household that would come to light later. Peter had a young daughter from his first marriage. She was his child from before he married Belle. She came to live with Peter and Belle on the farm. This little girl became sick and died while in Belle's care. Once again, Belle received insurance money. Peter's brother Gus came to the farm and was very suspicious. He thought Belle had something to do with the death of Peter's daughter.
He was angry about it.
He wanted to take the girl's body and have it examined. He demanded answers. Gus and Belle got into terrible arguments. In the end, Gus left the farm angry. He never returned. After Gus left, Belle gave birth to a son. The baby was a boy. She called him Philip. No one knew she was pregnant. No doctor had attended the birth. No midwife had helped. Belle simply announced that she had given birth to Philip and that he was Peter's son. The court accepted this, and Belle received more money because Philip was Peter's heir. Now Belle was a wealthy woman. She had enough money to live comfortably. She did not have to work for other people anymore. She did not have to struggle to survive. She was a woman of means, living on her own farm with her children. But Belle was never satisfied. She always wanted more money. She always wanted to find ways to make more and more money. And then she had an idea that would turn her into one of the most twisted killers in American history. Belle noticed that there were many lonely men living across the Midwest. There were men from Norway and from other Scandinavian countries. These men had immigrated to America looking for opportunity and looking for a better life. Many of them were bachelors. They lived alone. They worked hard at their jobs, but they were lonely. They wanted to have a wife. They wanted to have a family. They wanted to find love. They wanted to find companionship. Many of these men were relatively wealthy. They had worked for years and saved up money. They had property and possessions. But they were alone and they were lonely. Belle came up with a brilliant and evil plan. She would place advertisements in newspapers that were read by Norwegian immigrants and other Scandinavian immigrants. These newspapers were printed in the Norwegian language and the Danish language and other Scandinavian languages. There were many such newspapers published in the Midwest at this time. The ads would be personal ads. They would be looking for a husband. They would be looking for romance and companionship. The ad that Belle placed said something like this: personal. Comely widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts in Porte County, Indiana, desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman equally well provided, with view of joining fortunes. No replies by letter considered unless sender is willing to follow answer with personal visit. When lonely men read this advertisement, they felt hope. Here was a woman who owned a large farm. She was successful. She was established. She was looking for a man who was also successful. She was looking for a man to combine their fortunes with. This sounded like the perfect opportunity to these lonely men. This sounded like a chance to find love and marriage and a partner with whom to build a life. Men began to respond to Belle's advertisements. They began to write letters to her. Belle was very clever in her correspondence with these men. She was calculating. She was strategic. She set the terms. She asked the men questions about their finances. She asked them how much money they had. She asked them about their property. She asked them if they were healthy and strong. She made suggestions about what they should do. She wrote in her letters that the men should prepare their finances. She said they should sell their property. She said they should liquidate their assets. She said they should bring only cash. She said they should not bring anything else. She said that she wanted them to be completely prepared before they came to visit her on the farm. Some men hesitated. They were not sure if they should uproot their entire lives and travel to Indiana to meet a woman they had never met before. Some men decided not to do it. One man, Carl Peterson from Michigan, had been corresponding with Belle. She had written to him asking him to bring $1,000 in cash to prove that he was serious. Carl Peterson did not have $1,000 available at that time. He decided not to travel to meet Belle. Carl Peterson's life was saved because he was too poor to meet Belle's demands. If he had been able to gather together the money, he probably would have died on Belle's farm like so many other men did. Another man, a man named George Anderson, traveled to Belle's farm to meet her and to see if they might be able to have a relationship. George Anderson arrived at the farm and he spent some time with Belle. He was given a comfortable room. He was fed meals. Belle was hospitable and charming. She seemed like a good woman, but something strange happened. Late at night, George Anderson woke up to find Belle standing at the foot of his bed. She was standing there in the dark, looking at him. Her eyes looked strange. They looked cold and ravenous. There was something very wrong about her standing there watching him sleep. George Anderson felt a chill of fear go through him. He packed his belongings immediately. He left the farm in the middle of the night. He ran away. He got back to his home in Missouri as fast as he could. George Anderson escaped, but years later, when he read about what had happened at Belle's farm, he realized how close he had come to death. But many other men were not as lucky as George Anderson. Many other men did come to Belle's farm with their money, and many of these men simply vanished. They disappeared. They were never seen again. One of these men was named John Moe. John Moe was from Minnesota. He had read Belle's advertisement. He had written to Belle. He had received encouraging letters from her. She had told him that she would like to meet him. She had asked him to come to Porte. She had asked him to bring money. John Moe sold his property. He gathered together his money. He had approximately $1,000 in cash. He traveled to Porte, Indiana. He went to Belle Gunness farm. And then he disappeared. He was never seen again. His family never heard from him again. For a long time, nobody knew what had happened to John Moe. It was not until many years later that his remains were found buried in Belle's hog lot. Another man was named Henry Gaholt. Henry Gaholt was from Wisconsin. He was lonely. He wanted to find a wife. He read Belle's advertisement. He wrote to Belle. Belle wrote back to him. She seemed interested in him. She told him to come to her farm. She told him to bring money. Henry Gaholt put together what money he had. He traveled to Porte, Indiana. He went to Belle Gunness farm, and then he vanished. Nobody ever saw Henry Gaholt alive again. He became one of Belle's victims. Another man was named Olaf Svenherud. He was lonely, and he was looking for a wife. He answered Belle's advertisement. He went to her farm, and he disappeared. Another man was named Olby Budsberg. He answered Belle's advertisement and traveled to Indiana. He disappeared on Belle's farm. Another man was named Olaf Lindblom. He read about Belle's farm in a newspaper advertisement. He traveled to Porte to meet her. He never left the farm alive. These men and many others came to Belle's farm with dreams of love and companionship and new beginnings. They came with money that they had saved up over years of hard work, and they died on Belle's farm. The method that Belle used to kill these men was calculated and cold. She would first gain the man's trust. She would invite him into her home. She would be kind to him. She would cook him meals. She would make him feel welcome. She would seduce him. She would charm him. She would make him feel like he was finally going to find the happiness he had been looking for. After he was completely relaxed and had let his guard down, she would put poison into his food or his drink. She would put strychnine poison into his coffee. Strychnine is a terrible poison. When it enters the body, it causes severe muscle contractions and convulsions. The body goes into shock. The person being poisoned suffers terribly. Death comes after a period of extreme agony. But sometimes Belle wanted to be more direct. Sometimes she would wait until the man was asleep in his bed. She would come into the bedroom in the dark. She would have a hammer or an axe with her. She would stand over the sleeping man, and then she would bring the hammer or the axe down onto his head. She would smash his skull. The man would die quickly. She might use chloroform as well. She would put chloroform on a cloth and hold it over the man's face. The chloroform would put him to sleep. Then she would kill him while he was unconscious. Once the man was dead, Belle would move the body. She would drag it to the basement of her house. She would lay it on a table, and then she would use her knowledge from her years working at the butcher shop to cut up the body. She would butcher the human remains just like she would butcher an animal carcass. She would sever the head from the body. She would cut off the arms at the shoulders. She would cut off the legs at the knees. She would chop up the torso into pieces. She would wrap the pieces in burlap sacks. She would tie the sacks shut. Then she would take these sacks of human remains out to her property. She would dig holes in the ground. She would bury the sacks near her hog pen. She would bury them under her garden. She would bury them in different places on her property. Some of the bodies she would not bury at all. She would put the remains into her hog scalding vat. This was a large container of hot water that she used to scald hogs to remove their hair before butchering them. She would put the human remains in this hot water along with quicklime. The quicklime would help to break down the flesh. The hogs would eat some of the remains. The hot water and quicklime would help to dissolve the evidence. Very little would be left behind. Sometimes, if Belle was tired after murdering a man and butchering his body, she would take a shortcut. She would just take the pieces of the body out to the hog pen in the middle of the night. She would throw the remains to the hogs. The The hogs would eat the pieces of the dead man. The hogs would consume the evidence. There would be nothing left but bones that were scattered and buried in the mud of the pig pen. The money that the man had brought with him, the money that he had worked so hard to save, the money that he thought he would use to start a new life with Belle, this money Belle would keep. She would take it and add it to her growing collection of money and wealth. On average, Belle was taking about $3,000 from each man who came to her farm. $3,000 in those days was a lot of money. It was worth about $100,000 in modern money. Some men brought more than $3,000. Some of them brought as much as $5,000 or even more. Belle was becoming quite rich from killing lonely men. Belle needed help with this terrible business. She could not do all of it by herself. She needed someone to help her move the bodies. She needed someone to help her dig the graves. She needed someone to help dispose of the remains. She needed an accomplice. In 1907, Belle hired a man named Ray Lamphere to work as a farmhand on her property. Ray Lamphere was known around Porte as a man with problems. He liked to drink. He liked to gamble. He did not have much money. He did not have much success in his life. He was desperate and troubled. But when Belle hired him, he saw it as an opportunity. Belle seemed like she was interested in him. She gave him a room in her house. She seemed to like him. She treated him well. Ray became fond of Belle very quickly. He felt lucky to have a place to stay and work. And then Belle did something with Ray Lamphere that she had done with some of the other workers on her farm. She became intimate with him. She let him come to her bed at night. Ray Lamphere thought this meant that Belle cared about him. He thought this meant that he and Belle might have a future together. He thought that he might eventually marry Belle, and they would run the farm together. He was in love with Belle, but Belle did not love Ray Lamphere. Ray Lamphere had no money.
He was not wealthy.
He was not someone who could help Belle get richer. He was just someone who was useful to her. He was someone who could help her with her dark work. When Belle had other suitors coming to the farm, men with money and property, Belle did not want Ray Lamphere to be around. She did not want them to see him. She was worried that the presence of another man might make the suitors suspicious. She was worried that her carefully planned scheme might be discovered. So Belle treated Ray Lamphere badly. She made him work in the barn and the fields. She kept him away from the main house when she had visitors. She told him to stay out of sight. Ray Lamphere became jealous. He saw the wealthy men arriving at the farm. He saw Belle paying attention to them. He saw her being nice to them. He became angry and resentful. He wanted to be the one that Belle loved. He did not want to share her with all these other men. Ray Lamphere started to express his jealousy and possessiveness to Belle. He told her that he did not like all these men coming to the farm. He told her that he wanted her attention. He told her that he wanted to marry her. He told her that they should be together. But Belle dismissed him. She told him that these men were just business associates. She told him that there was nothing between her and these men. She told him that she only cared about him, Ray. But Ray did not believe her. He saw what was happening. He knew that there was something wrong. He started to have suspicions. He started to wonder if these men were disappearing. He started to notice that men would come to the farm and then they would not be there anymore. They would leave without saying goodbye, or they would just vanish. Ray did not know exactly what was happening, but something in his gut told him that something terrible was going on. By early 1908, Belle had decided that she did not want Ray Lamphere working for her anymore. She had decided that he was becoming too much trouble. He was too jealous. He was asking too many questions. He was becoming a liability. She told Ray that she was firing him. She told him to leave. Ray was devastated. He had loved Belle. He had thought they would be together. Now he was being thrown out like he was nothing. Ray Lamphere left the farm, but he did not leave peacefully. He was angry. He was hurt. He was bitter. He told people in town that he was going to sue Belle. He said that he had left some carpentry tools on her property, and he wanted them back. He said that Belle had treated him badly. He said that she owed him money. He said that he would get revenge on her. He threatened that he would burn her house down. He told people that he would kill her and destroy her property. Belle heard about Ray's threats. She became worried. She went into town. She went to see her lawyer, a man named Emmy Lelliter. She told her lawyer that she was afraid. She said that Ray Lamphere was going to come after her. She said that Ray had threatened to kill her and burn her house down. She asked her lawyer to make out a will. She said that she wanted to make sure that if anything happened to her, her children would be taken care of. She wanted to leave her property to her children. She had her lawyer draw up the will. She signed the will on April 27th, 1908. After Belle left the lawyer's office, She went shopping. She bought several things. She bought cakes. She bought a toy train. She bought 2 gallons of kerosene. She brought these things home with her. That evening, she made a large meal for her children. She made meat and potatoes. The children ate the meal. After dinner, Belle sat on the floor with her children and played with them. She played with the toy train that she had just bought. She spent a pleasant evening with her 3 children, Myrtle and Lucy and Philip. But Belle was not planning to spend another evening with her children. She was not planning a future with them. She was planning to disappear. In the early morning hours of April 28, 1908, something happened at Belle Gunness farmhouse. The fire started around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. When the neighbors woke up and saw the flames, they rushed to the house. They tried to break down the doors. They called out for Belle and her children. They tried to see if they could save anyone, but the doors were locked. The windows were blocked. Nobody answered. The fire burned hot and fast. Soon the entire house was engulfed in flames. By the time the fire was put out, the farmhouse had been completely destroyed. It was just charred rubble and ashes. When the authorities arrived, they began to search through the remains. In the basement of the destroyed house, they found the burned bodies of 4 people. 3 of them were identified as Belle's children. There was Myrtle, age 11. There was Lucy, age 9. There was Philip, age 5. The 4th body was an adult. It was a woman's body. The body was headless. The head was missing. It had been cut off or destroyed. But the authorities assumed that this headless body was Belle Gunness. They thought that Belle had been in the house when it caught fire. They thought that she had died trying to save her children. The local newspaper ran the story the next morning. The headline was very sad. It talked about the tragic fire. It talked about the poor widow who had died trying to protect her children. It talked about the terrible loss. The people of Porte were sad about what had happened. They felt sympathy for Belle Gunness. Everyone had thought that she was a decent, hardworking woman. Everyone had thought that she was a good mother. Now she was dead. It was a tragedy. It was a terrible thing that had happened. But the sheriff, a man named Albert Smutzer, was suspicious. The sheriff knew about Ray Lamphere. The sheriff knew about Ray's threats. The sheriff knew that Ray had said he was going to burn Belle's house down. The sheriff suspected that Ray had set the fire. The sheriff arrested Ray Lamphere. Ray was charged with 4 counts of murder and arson. Ray Lamphere denied that he had anything to do with the fire. He said that he did not know anything about it. He said that he was not even in the area when the fire started. He said that he had nothing to do with Belle's death or the death of her children. But the authorities were convinced that Ray had done it. They put him in jail to await trial. They charged him with murder and arson. But then something very strange started to happen. A man named Assel Helgelian showed up in Porte. Assel Helgelian was looking for his brother, Andrew Helgelian. Andrew had come to Porte several months earlier. He had come to meet Belle Gunness. He had answered her advertisement in the newspaper. Andrew had written to Belle. Belle had written back to him. Belle had asked Andrew to come to visit her. Belle had asked Andrew to bring his money. Belle had asked Andrew to sell his property and bring the cash. Andrew had done what Belle asked. He had sold his farm. He had gathered together about $3,000 in cash. He had traveled to Porte, Indiana. He had gone to Belle Gunness farm to meet her. That was the last time anyone had heard from Andrew Helgelian. Months had passed since Andrew had arrived at Belle's farm. Andrew had not written to his family. He had not been in touch with anyone. His brother Assel started to worry. Assel tried to figure out where Andrew had gone. Assel contacted people who might know where Andrew was. Nobody knew anything. Assel was worried that something bad had happened to Andrew. He decided to go to Porte himself to try to find out what had happened to his brother. When Assel arrived in Porte, he heard about the fire at Belle Gunness farm. He heard that Belle had died in the fire along with her children. He went to the farm to see if he could find any information about his brother. He found some of Andrew's belongings. He found some of Andrew's papers and letters. He brought these to the sheriff and asked the sheriff if Belle had said anything about Andrew. Sheriff Smutzer agreed to help Assel search the property. They went out to look for any signs of Andrew. They were looking around the farm when they noticed something strange. There were several places on the ground where the earth seemed to have sunk down a little bit. There were depressions and indentations in the ground in several places, particularly around the hog pen area. It looked like the ground had been dug up and then filled back in. It looked like there might be something buried under the ground. Sheriff Smutzer told his men to start digging in one of these depressions. As they dug down, they found something wrapped in burlap cloth. As they unwrapped it, they found human remains. The remains had been chopped up. There were pieces of a body in the burlap sack. There was a head. There were hands. There were feet. All of the pieces belonged to the same person. And when Assel looked at the remains, He recognized them. He recognized his brother Andrew. He recognized Andrew's face. It was Andrew Helgelian.
He was dead.
He had been murdered. Now the authorities understood. Belle Gunness was not the victim of a fire. Belle Gunness was a killer. The authorities understood that the headless body found in the fire was not Belle Gunness. It was another victim. It was another person that Belle had murdered. The authorities understood that there were probably many more bodies buried on this property. They started to dig. They started to search the entire property. In the hog pen area, they found many more depressions in the ground. They started digging in all of them, one after another. They found burlap sacks, one after another. They found human remains. They found torsos. They found hands. They found feet. They found heads. All of the remains had been carefully chopped up and dismembered. All of them had been buried in shallow graves. On the first day of digging, they found the remains of 5 bodies. On the second day, they found 6 more bodies. The authorities were shocked. They kept digging and kept finding more and more bodies. The remains were in terrible condition. The bodies had been in the ground for different amounts of time. Some had been buried recently. Some had been buried for years. Some of the remains were almost completely skeletons. Some still had flesh and tissue attached. Many of the remains had been partially eaten by hogs or had decayed severely. But one thing was clear. All of the bodies had been treated the same way. All of them had been decapitated. All of them had had their arms removed at the shoulders. All of them had had their legs cut off at the knees. All of the bodies showed signs of expert butchering. Someone who knew how to cut up flesh had done this work. Someone who had experience with butchering had prepared these bodies for burial. As the digging continued, more and more bodies were found. The authorities started to lose track of how many bodies they had uncovered. They stopped counting. There were so many bodies. There were so many remains scattered across the property. It was a graveyard. It was a field of death. It was a garden of horror. The police also found something else. They found the body of Jenny Olson, Belle's adopted daughter. Jenny had disappeared years earlier in 1906. Belle had told people that Jenny had been sent away to school in California, but Jenny's body was buried on Belle's property. She had never gone to California. She had been murdered and buried in Belle's hog lot. As they continued to search, they also found large quantities of poison. They found strychnine. They found chloroform. They found other chemicals that could be used to poison people or put them to sleep. They found evidence that Belle had been using these poisons to kill her victims. The story that emerged from the digging was a story of horror and cruelty. Belle Gunness had been luring men to her farm with the promise of love and marriage. She had been murdering them. She had been stealing their money. She had been dismembering their bodies and burying them on her property. She had been doing this for years. She had killed dozens of people. The exact number of victims was never determined with certainty. Different estimates gave different numbers. Some authorities said there were at least 14 confirmed victims. Some said there were 20 or more. Some said there could have been as many as 40 or even more than 40 victims. It is possible that Belle murdered between 25 and 40 people. The exact number will probably never be known because many of the bodies could not be identified and many of the remains were too decomposed to be accurately counted or examined. When the news of what had been discovered at Belle's farm spread throughout the country, it became one of the biggest news stories of the time. Newspapers all across America ran headlines about the murders. They called Belle Gunness by many different names. They called her the Lady Bluebeard. They called her Hell's Belle. They called her the Indiana Ogress. They called her the Mistress of the Castle of Death. They called her the Human Vampire. They called her the High Priestess of Murder. They called her the Queen of Crime. They called her the La Porte Ghoul. The farm itself was called the Murder Farm. It was called the Death Garden. It was called the Horror Farm. The story was so sensational and so shocking that thousands of people traveled to La Porte to see the farm for themselves. Tourists came from all across the country. They came to see the place where the murders had happened. They came to see the hog pen, where the bodies had been buried. They came to see the hole where the graves were being excavated. Hotels and boarding houses in La Porte were filled with sightseers. Vendors set up stands to sell things to the tourists. They sold photographs of the farm. They sold pictures of Belle Gunness. They sold pictures of the graves. They sold replicas of skulls. They sold all sorts of souvenirs related to the case. Some vendors even created a food concoction that they called Gunness stew and tried to sell it to the tourists. The investigation into the murders became a huge event. Newspaper reporters came to Porte from all across the country. They wanted to report on the case. They wanted to get details and information. They wanted to interview people who knew Belle. They wanted to take photographs and send them to their newspapers. The story was the biggest crime story of the time. It was more famous than any other murder case happening in America at that moment. But there was still one big mystery. Where was Belle Gunness? Was the headless body found in the fire actually Belle? Or had Belle faked her own death and escaped? The authorities found something that seemed to answer this question. Several days after the fire, workers who were sifting through the rubble found a pair of dental bridges. Dental bridges are false teeth that fit into a person's mouth. The authorities brought these dental bridges to the dentist who had made them. The dentist examined the bridges and said that they belonged to Belle Gunness. The dentist said that he had made these exact bridges for Belle. He said that he was absolutely certain that they belonged to her. This seemed to prove that Belle had died in the fire. If the dental bridges that belonged to Belle were found in the ashes of the house, then Belle must have been in the house when it burned. The dental bridges had survived the fire because they were made of metal and ceramics that could withstand high heat. This evidence seemed to settle the question. Belle Gunness was dead. She had died in the fire along with her children. But many people were not convinced. Many people who had seen Belle in life knew that she was a very large woman. She was almost 6 feet tall. She weighed between 250 and 300 pounds. She was a big, strong woman. But the headless body found in the fire was much smaller. It was much shorter. It weighed much less. It did not have the same body type as Belle Gunness. It looked like the body of a smaller, lighter woman. Many neighbors and people who knew Belle said that the body found in the fire could not possibly be Belle. It was too small. It did not match her size. Some people wondered if Belle had killed another woman and dressed her in Belle's clothes and used her body to fake her own death. Some people wondered if Belle had lured a woman to the farm on the pretext of hiring her as a housekeeper. Some people wondered if Belle had murdered this woman and then used the woman's body to make it look like Belle had died in the fire. If this was true, then Belle might have faked her death and escaped. Ray Lamphere was still in jail awaiting trial for the murder and arson. The trial of Ray Lamphere became a major event. The prosecution argued that Ray had set the fire to burn down Belle's house and to kill her and her children. The prosecution presented the dental bridges as evidence that Belle had died in the fire. The prosecution argued that Ray had the motive because Belle had fired him and rejected him. But the defense had a different theory. The defense argued that Ray had not killed Belle. The defense argued that the headless body found in the fire was not Belle. The defense argued that Belle was still alive. The defense brought in expert witnesses to testify about the size of the body. The expert witnesses agreed that the body found in the fire was too small to be Belle Gunness. The experts said that a person could remove dental bridges from their mouth without destroying them. The experts said that Belle might have put her dental bridges in the basement to make it look like she had died in the fire. The trial lasted for several weeks. There was a lot of testimony. There was a lot of evidence presented. There was a lot of debate about whether the body found in the fire was Belle or someone else. The jury was not sure. The jury could not decide. The jury was split. 10 jurors thought that Ray was guilty of murder. 2 jurors did not think he was guilty of murder. Because the jury was split, the jury could not find Ray guilty of murder. But the jury did find Ray guilty of arson. The jury said that Ray had set the fire, but they were not sure if Ray had killed Belle. Ray Lamphere was convicted of arson and sentenced to prison. He was sent to the Indiana State Prison at Michigan City. Ray went to prison, but he was not happy about his conviction. He maintained that he was innocent. He said that he had nothing to do with the murders. He said that Belle had done the killing. He said that he had helped Belle bury some of the bodies, but he had not murdered anyone. While Ray was in prison, something very important happened. Ray Lamphere became very sick. He developed tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is a serious disease that affects the lungs. Ray's condition got worse and worse. He was dying from tuberculosis. As Ray lay dying in the prison hospital, he decided that he wanted to confess. He decided that he wanted to tell the truth before he died. He asked for a clergyman to come and visit him. A Methodist minister named Reverend Edwin Shell came to see Ray in the prison hospital. Ray told Reverend Shell his story. Ray told the Reverend everything that he knew about Belle Gunness and her murders. Ray gave the Reverend a detailed confession. The Reverend listened to Ray's confession. The Reverend took notes. The Reverend got Ray to sign his statement. The Reverend sealed the confession and locked it in his safe. In Ray's confession, Ray admitted many things. Ray admitted that he had guilty knowledge of the murders. Ray admitted that he had helped Belle dispose of bodies. Ray admitted that he had helped Belle bury the remains of at least 3 men that he knew of. Ray admitted that he had been paid some money for his help, but he said that Belle had not given him as much as he thought he was entitled to. Ray admitted that he was angry with Belle because she was not giving him enough of the money from the murders. Ray told the story about what had happened to Andrew Helgelian. Ray said that Andrew had come to the farm. Andrew had money with him. Belle had drugged Andrew. Ray said that he had helped Belle by boring a hole in the floor so he could watch what happened in the bedroom. Ray said he had seen Belle with Andrew. Ray said that Andrew had been groaning in pain. Ray said that Andrew had been begging Belle to call a doctor, but Belle had told Andrew that he would be fine soon. Ray said that Belle had given Andrew something to make him sleep. Ray said that after Andrew was asleep, Belle had used her axe to split Andrew's head open. Ray said that he had helped Belle carry the body to the basement and bury it. Ray also told the story about how Belle had faked her death. According to Ray, Belle had decided that it was time for her to leave. Belle was worried that Assel Helgelian was coming to investigate and that people were starting to figure out what was happening. Belle decided to burn down the house and fake her death. Ray said that Belle had hired a woman from Chicago to come to the farm. Belle had told the woman that she was going to hire her as a housekeeper, but Belle had no intention of hiring her as a housekeeper. Ray said that Belle had drugged the woman. Ray said that Belle had bashed in the woman's head and killed her. Ray said that Belle had decapitated the woman. Ray said that Belle had taken the woman's head and tied weights to it and thrown it into a swamp. Ray said that Belle had taken the woman's body and dressed it in Belle's old clothes. Ray said that Belle had taken out her false teeth and placed them beside the headless body so that the body would be identified as Belle. Ray said that Belle had then given her 3 children something to make them sleep. Ray said that Belle had smothered her children to death. Ray said that Belle had dragged the bodies of her children and the body of the dead woman from Chicago into the basement of the house. Ray said that Belle had poured kerosene around the house. Ray said that Belle had set the house on fire. Ray said that he had helped Belle escape. Ray said that he was supposed to wait on the road to help Belle get away, but Belle did not come to the road where he was waiting. Ray said that Belle had escaped by running across the open fields and disappearing into the woods. Ray said that Belle was still alive. Ray said that Belle had escaped. Ray said that Belle had gotten away with all her money. Ray said that Belle had murdered at least 42 men, although the exact number was hard to know because he had not been there from the beginning, and Belle had been killing men for a long time. Ray said that Belle had stolen huge amounts of money from these men. He said that she had accumulated more than $250,000, which was an enormous amount of money at that time. Ray said that Belle had withdrawn most of her money from her bank accounts shortly before the fire, which suggested that she was planning to flee. But here's the problem with Ray's confession. Ray said that Belle had killed Jenny Olson in the fire on the night of the fire. Ray said that Belle had used chloroform on Jenny to put her to sleep, and that Jenny had died in the fire. But Jenny Olson had actually disappeared and been killed years before. In 1906, Jenny's body was buried in Belle's hog lot. So Ray's account about Jenny dying in the fire could not possibly be accurate. This made people wonder if other parts of Ray's confession might not be completely accurate either. Ray Lamphere died on December 30th, 1909. He died from tuberculosis in the Indiana State Prison Hospital. With his death, many of the mysteries about what exactly had happened at Belle's farm died with him. Ray's confession had provided some information, but it also raised more questions. Nobody would ever know for certain exactly what had happened on the night of April 28, 1908. After Ray's death, the authorities continued to investigate. They tried to identify the bodies that had been found on Belle's property. For many of the bodies, they were able to determine the identity. They found families of missing men who had corresponded with Belle. They matched the remains to the missing men, but for many of the bodies, it was impossible to determine who they were. The remains had deteriorated too much. The families of the missing men could not be found. The records and letters had been lost. Many of the victims remained unidentified. The authorities also investigated Belle's past. They looked into what had happened in Chicago. They found evidence of the fires. They found records of the insurance payouts. They found evidence that Belle had been poisoning people for years. They exhumed the graves of Belle's first husband Mads and their children Caroline and Axel in Chicago. They had the bodies examined by doctors and chemists. The doctors and chemists found evidence of strychnine in the remains. They found evidence that Mads and the children had been poisoned. The authorities also looked into what had happened to Peter Gunness in Indiana. They wondered if they should exhume his body and examine it for poison. But in the end, they decided not to do it. Peter had already been buried for several years. The authorities felt that they had enough evidence about Belle's crimes without exhuming Peter's body. The question of whether Belle Gunness had really died in the fire or whether she had escaped has remained unsolved to this day. In 2008, more than 100 years after the fire, a team of forensic anthropologists from the University of Indianapolis tried to solve the mystery by doing DNA testing. They exhumed the remains of the woman believed to be Belle from the Forest Home Cemetery in Chicago. They tried to compare the DNA from these remains with DNA from letters that Belle had sent to some of her victims. But the DNA was too old and too degraded. The testing was inconclusive. They could not determine for certain whether the remains belonged to Belle or not. But whether Belle died in the fire or whether she escaped, one thing is certain. Belle Gunness disappeared after April 28, 1908. She was never seen again. Or at least, there were many reports of sightings, but none of them were ever confirmed. For many years after the fire, people claimed to have seen Belle Gunness in various places around the country. Some people said they saw her in Chicago. Some people said they saw her in San Francisco. Some people said they saw her in New York. Some people said they saw her in Los Angeles. Some people said they saw her in smaller towns all across the Midwest. As late as 1931, more than 20 years after the fire, someone reported seeing Belle Gunness living in a small town in Mississippi. They said she was living there quietly, and that she owned property there. The sheriff of Porte County, Albert Smutzer, received an average of 2 reports per month about Belle Gunness sightings for more than 20 years after the fire. People would call the sheriff or write to the sheriff saying that they had seen Belle somewhere. The sheriff would investigate some of these reports, but he never found anything. None of the sightings were ever confirmed to be authentic. Belle Gunness became a legend. She became part of American folklore. She became the subject of stories and rumors. Was she dead or alive? Did she really die in the fire, or did she escape and live out the rest of her life somewhere else, hiding from the law? The truth is, we will probably never know for certain. The mystery of Belle Gunness has never been completely solved. But what we do know is that she was a serial killer of terrible cruelty. She murdered dozens of people. She stole their money. She dismembered their bodies. She buried them on her farm. She lived a double life. To the people of Porte, she seemed like a respectable widow and a good mother. But in reality, she was a cold-blooded murderer. The farm where Belle lived became famous. It became known as the murder farm. People wanted to visit the place. People wanted to see where the murders had happened. The property eventually became a tourist attraction. Sightseers came from all over the country to see the farm. They wanted to stand on the ground where so many people had been murdered and buried. The hog pen became famous. The graves became famous. The entire property became a place of dark and morbid interest. Eventually, the farm was sold and changed hands many times. The buildings were destroyed or removed. The graves were filled in. The site was disturbed and disturbed again. Over time, much of the original farm disappeared under development and change. But the history of the place remained. The story of Belle Gunness remained. The story of Belle Gunness reminds us of how evil can hide behind a normal appearance. It reminds us that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who seem the most respectable and ordinary. It reminds us of the importance of paying attention to the people around us and questioning things that seem strange or suspicious. It reminds us of a dark chapter in American history when a woman named Belle Gunness lured lonely men to their deaths on her farm in Indiana. Belle Gunness represents one of the most prolific female serial killers in American history. Whether she killed 14 people or whether she killed 40 people, she was a murderer on a massive scale. She murdered men. She murdered children. She murdered people who came to her with hope and dreams and trust. She murdered them for their money. She murdered them because she enjoyed the power and control over life and death. She murdered them, and then she disappeared, leaving behind a trail of mystery and unanswered questions that has fascinated people for more than 100 years. The story of Belle Gunness is a story of greed and cruelty and evil. It is a story of a woman who wanted wealth and power more than anything else in the world. It is a story of a woman who is willing to do anything, no matter how horrible or cruel, to achieve her goals. It is a story that shows us the darkest aspect